Well, it is all the talk again. Kansas leaving the Big 12 for the SEC or the Big 10. And maybe they're popular enough to actually do it. This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Big 12 Media Week, everybody. I'm Drake Toll from Locked On Big 12, America's #1 Big 12 podcast. That is John Grove of Wildcat 91.9. We are talking all things Big 12 today. Thanks for making this show your first listen every single day. Kansas, #1, moving from the Big 12 to the SEC or the Big 10. That topic's come around like once a month for the last 3 months, and it's back again. We'll also go through how the Big 12 can land multiple college football playoff teams in a dream scenario where 3, Trace, if you are an Espanol, all get in. And we'll finish it off with Kansas State winning the Big 12, not Utah. But first, Kansas looking for a move outside of the Big 12. John, this was a big topic a couple of months ago. Greg Pflugar picked it up, and then John Kurtz talked about it this week, and then Josh Pate has had weird little inklings of the future of the Big 12 and what it could mean for teams that are leaving. And this is one that, had you said it 5 years ago, everybody goes point and laugh at that guy. You know, Kansas, the worst football team in the country, going to the SEC or the Big 10. But now, and especially from the perspective of a Kansas State guy who's been much better at football than Kansas the last 2 decades, crazy to think that we're in a conversation of the 2 biggest conferences in the country poaching the Jayhawks.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me along for the ride, Drake. But, the prevailing arguments I've been seeing from a lot of Kansas fans and a lot of KU pundits is that if the SEC comes knocking, you don't say no. Okay, fine. I understand where you're coming from in terms of the buyout that you will get to the SEC. I mean, would that help you in recruiting? Probably. Would that help you maybe claim an additional first-round pick in the long run? Possibly. But Drake, this is predicated on the idea that we're going towards these 2 super conference model with the SEC and the Big 10, while the Big 12 will slowly fade off into irrelevancy. Now, that's what they said a few years back when Texas and Oklahoma bolted, but that didn't turn out to be true. It got better from a leadership and really a competitive standpoint as well, knowing how even a lot of these programs are. But let's just say, Drake, that we go towards a super conference system in the SEC and the Big 10, all right? What you're going to run into is that Kansas will probably be allowed to go in there despite the exit fee and the bylaws. I haven't read too much into that yet, but because of its prowess and its blue blood status, they'll likely be more attractive compared to several other Big 12 schools. It's not me hating on the schools necessarily. It's just a fact of the matter, all right? What I do think is hilarious is that now is the time when Kansas is putting in the full investment into football and several other sports not named basketball, because we already know they can't win in basketball except last year and year before. But we are going to invest in football, all right? We're going to start winning games. If you want to ensure that that you obliterate your football program and never have any kind of success beyond remote mediocrity again, go to the SEC. All right, let's be perfectly honest with ourselves. Even with the progress Kansas has made throughout the years, and I'll admit Lance Leopold is the right coach at Kansas. He's got the program moving in an upward trajectory, but there's a significant difference in having a 4-week stretch where you're playing Iowa State, BYU, Colorado, and Baylor, who none of those 4 teams have the 5-star offensive lineman. They don't have a 5-star defensive lineman. They don't have the 4.3 speed across the board. They just don't have any of that. And it's a whole different scenario when you go into a game in Sanford Stadium in Athens, Georgia, where you line up against linemen that are 6'8", 350 pounds, all of which who are first-round draft picks, who have a 4.8, 4.9 kind of speed. That's a monumental task. And it wouldn't just be for 1 week, Drake. It would be consecutively, except for that additional week where you run into a Vanderbilt or Kentucky. But ultimately, I think their basketball program will be fine in the long run because it's Kansas. But from a football standpoint, for a lack of better comparison, it's just like putting someone on death row. I'm just going to leave it at that.
The basketball deal here is from my perspective, I've always thought football is the moneymaker, that's the game changer, and truly it is. Now there are murmurs of TV networks like Fox and ESPN valuing even further what basketball can do for a school and how it can build your brand, right? We keep using the word brand. That's what it is. That's how you move. And expansion is having a strong brand. Do you think Kansas is strong enough in basketball only to wiggle its way into a bigger conference based off just that sport?
Well, from an SEC standpoint, looking at it from an SEC standpoint, Drake, is that you already have pretty much maximized the value you have with football with all of its perennial power brands. In order to continue finding ways to generate revenue, you're going to have to look at several ways, maybe not in the extreme Big 12 way where you're looking at private equity or naming rights changes to the conference, but maybe you're looking for some minor revenue league changes. And we've seen basketball really make its push lately in the media draws for everybody or TV eyeballs. I mean, that's mainly been one of the reasons why I think UConn could be a pretty serviceable candidate along with several ACC schools just because of that basketball brand and that prowess. And I've been banging on the drum for quite some time that they should be a candidate. I digress. But, the SEC and Greg Sankey may also see the basketball value as well by not only looking at a school like Kansas, but you're also looking at additional basketball teams like a North Carolina or Virginia, who constantly get brought up in the latest conference realignment talks because, one, the ACC has pretty much in doom's gloom. And two, you're also looking at two additional Southeastern markets in North Carolina and Virginia that the SEC has not necessarily gotten towards yet. But you get those two schools, maybe you add in a Duke, and then if you add a Kansas all of a sudden, that really just speaks volumes to how loaded the basketball will be, because now you got a Kentucky program that's there as we'll see what Mark Pope's able to do. John Calipari is now in Arkansas. That's going to be a lot of TV eyeballs. That's going to lean towards in Fayetteville. Alabama's been good. Auburn's been great. I mean, if Sankey is starting to see more of this basketball approach, it would not shock me one bit if Kansas does get considered as an expansion candidate in the near future. But it really, from an overall standpoint, if you want to, in the event that these two super conferences come up, Drake, in which they are having these conversations, all right, so they can hedge their bets, because that's where the pundits seem to be thinking, that's where college sports is trending towards. You're likely going to get that invite anyways because of the prestigious basketball program in Lawrence. All right, I get that point. Out of all the realignment rumors, a lot of things are starting to run rampant. But if you're Kansas, it boils down to two options, in my opinion. One, you ensure that you will receive a paycheck while becoming the proverbial doormat of the SEC, or you can stay, continue to win in basketball against several perennial Big 12 basketball brands in Arizona, Houston, and Baylor, while proving yourself even more valuable on the football side of things, where you might end up being a mid-tier SEC program like Missouri and Arkansas have become. I think that's the route Kansas will likely choose. I mean, time will tell about what will occur in all of this realignment, but I do think they're starting to become a little bit more of a narrative push with basketball. And on top of that, what we've seen so far from the Big East media deal that just came out, it has a lot of exposure. So
basketball is garnering money, and that is not something that I necessarily expected to say even 3 months ago, John. But you mentioned how Kansas and football can still stay alive and afloat, and even maybe at the top of the Big 12, maybe make a college football playoff appearance. I think Kansas State makes the exact same case this year. Let's go college football playoff next on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is where I go every week to say, oh, the Texas Rangers are playing? I bet they're going to lose. Look, I'm shameless. I'm the fan that goes in and says, look, if FanDuel's going to give me the opportunity to bet on anybody else that's not the Texas Rangers, I'm okay with betting money on the other team, because then when the Rangers win, I'm happy because they won, and when they lose, I make money. That's not a bad thing. This summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. I love sports. I love them even more when FanDuel is my back pocket to keep me going. So head over to FanDuel.com to start making the most out of your summer. Visit FanDuel.com right now, or FanDuel.com/locked on even. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Go to FanDuel.com today. We got John Grove on Locked On Big 12 today from Wildcat 91.9 FM. John, the college football playoff, new format, 12 teams this year. 11 of those will come from Power 4 conferences. The Big 12 could feasibly, they're going to get one in for certain. A top 4 seed here, they got to buy. If Kansas State wins the Big 12, they get a buy in. If Kansas does, or Utah, whoever. Then, in my dream scenario, you're going to have to talk me off the ledge here. In my dream scenario, it is a couple of 11-1 Big 12 teams are competing for the Big 12 championship, and the winner goes obviously to the playoff. The loser, sitting at 11-2, also gets a spot in that 8-9 range or 7-6 range or wherever. And in a dream scenario, we have 12-0, 11-1, 11-1. Somebody, that 11-1, is kept out of the Big 12 championship. They're the 11th overall team. How do you leave an 11-1 team out of the college football playoff? The other two compete at the very top, like Kansas State and Utah are both 11, or one's 12-0, one's 11-1, and West Virginia is 11-1. Now, I think all 3 of those teams make a case to get in, especially if you have a couple of 12-1s and an 11-1. I mean, there is a route, and I know I'm piecing it together. There's a route where the Big 12 gets not just 2, but 3, when a whole lot of talking heads say the conference will only get 1.
Well, Drake, looking at the little bit of what you were talking about right there, you mentioned about a dream scenario where you're able to get the maximum of 3 teams in. I think your mark would have to be known as the king of all realignment commissioners at this point, knowing that you got 3 teams in the playoff. That's going to generate a lot more revenue, but it's not going to be as easy as you said. And you mentioned as well, how are we going to leave out an 11-1 third place, second place Big 12 team? Well, it's just now it's the media people that are starting to take notice of these Big 10 or SEC programs it's programs like Texas, USC, and all those Michigan winged helmets. They're going to value the logo on the side of a helmet more, just knowing about the prestige and brand. I think that's something that kind of caught Florida State a little bit off guard this past season, having to play several ACC teams, and Alabama was given the nod. But this year, you're going to 12 teams. You're going to get an automatic team from the Big 12 in. But in order to truly find a way to try and get 2 to 3 teams in the playoff, I think it really first starts with winning several big key non-conference games. That will really compare you apples to oranges, like the Big 12 and the Big 10 and the Big 12 and the SEC, especially with the Big 10 where you have Penn State traveling to West Virginia. Personally, I think that's going to be the most important non-conference game of the Big 12 that season, knowing that if you're able to pull off a giant win, you can look at Penn State saying, oh, they're a massive brand, but they lost to a Big 12 school in West Virginia. I mean, maybe Iowa and Iowa State, same thing there, UCF in Florida, but it boils down to winning several of these big non-conference games to really catch the eyeballs of the media pundits and everybody everywhere that continue to just talk about the Big 10 and the SEC. And I think right now the narrative is so heavily leaning towards the Big 10 and the SEC, I don't necessarily see a 2 or a second team or a third team right now in the playoff mix. I think there's going to have to be possibly the best case scenario for all of it to kind of fold. I think they need multiple SEC teams to go 3 losses, 4 losses, something like that. I don't know, Drake. It's kind of an uncertainty about what's going to occur, but yeah.
Is there a world, and maybe this is an easy answer too, where an 11-1 Big 12 team like West Virginia gets left out for 10-2 Missouri, who didn't go to the SEC championship?
That's a good question. I think it kind of goes back to what we mentioned about the resumes of each team's schedule. And another thing to point out with West Virginia as well, they're one of the rare Big 12 teams that aren't listed as one of the easiest schedules, because they got 2 Power 5 teams on their non-conference schedule in Penn State and Pittsburgh. They go to Pittsburgh while they're hosting Penn State. You're looking at several of these teams, especially with their non-conference resumes. Missouri, I mean, they have Boston College, There you go. I mean, but they have a really easy 6 to 7 game stretch to start the season before they run into Alabama. How much it really comes down to how much the College Football Playoff Committee is going to truly put a value on the strength of the conferences. Whereas you're going to see just like the SEC patches on several of these teams, even though they got like a Missouri who's got kind of an easy gateway through a schedule. And hopefully just knowing that the Big 12 is going to be competitive, is going to be a lot of evenly leveled teams of West Virginia, Utah, Oklahoma State, Iowa State. If you're able to pull off several big non-conference wins, and if you're able to do your part, go 12-0, 11-1, and you see multiple SEC, Big Ten teams with 2 or 3 losses, I think that gives you a better opportunity of possibly further elevating your status as not just an athletics program or football program, but more so for the conference as well.
Is parity going to hurt this league when it comes to the college football playoff?
That's what they said when the Big East was still a conference, when it was at 8 teams. Yeah. It felt like as if anybody could beat anybody on a year-to-year basis. From a realignment standpoint, that didn't necessarily work out, but we're talking about a different scenario here. I think right now it's the lack of prestigious brands that is hurting the Big 12, not necessarily from a competitive standpoint. I
exposure standpoint for sure. You know, I mean, if you were to point at the Big 12 conference and say, who is your king? Who is the big dog? There isn't one. And you could go to the ACC and say, okay, there's still 2, though they're suing the league and leaving. It's Texas and Oklahoma were vying for that spot year in and year out. Even when Texas sucked, they still had the brand. And the SEC, you could point to whoever's winning the national championship. And the Big Ten is 3 teams, really 2 teams at the very top. And the Big 12 doesn't have that. So I think from the parity standpoint, even kind of going back to what you alluded to, that it is, if you eat yourself alive, you're not going to have any representation of the college football playoff except for the teams at the top. So maybe it's time to root for some stars of the Big 12. One of those stars might be Kansas State. Coming up, Kansas State will win this conference. This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. I'm going to see Tyler Childers play live in Idaho in a couple of weeks, and I'm excited to see Tyler Childers play live in Idaho, but I don't have Tyler Childers live in Idaho tickets. Why? Because Game Time is where I go to buy my tickets, and I don't have to stress about doing that 4 months in advance. Because with last-minute deals at Game Time, save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, and theater. So I'm going to go to the concert. I'm going to be like outside of the concert going, pit tickets. Way cheaper than they were yesterday. Click. Flash deals, zone deals, all-in pricing. You can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Lowest price guaranteed, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Game Time ticket exchange coverage, too. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the industry. Right now, take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download Game Time today. Create an account. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. That is code LOCKEDONCollege at Game Time on the app right now. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, and that is guaranteed. John Grove joining Locked On Big 12 today from Wildcat 91.9. And no secret that the guy from Wildcat 91.9 thinks that Kansas State's going to win the Big 12 conference. Everybody seems to believe that Utah is right there at the top. I think Kansas has a legitimate shot to go to Arlington. And I know earlier in the show you gave them some of their flowers. They're a good football program. People have talked about dark horses like West Virginia or Oklahoma State, who brings everybody back, or Iowa State. For you, why is it Kansas State who will win the Big 12 in football in 2024?
Well, Drake, quite frankly, I was being a little bit generous towards Kansas there for a second. But now that I got my purple shades on, right here, just pretend that the shades are purple. I definitely think the high-end potential is there for Kansas State to win the Big 12. And a lot of that, of course, is based around Avery Johnson. And I think the rest of our roster is certainly very, very talented. And if if it were like Will Howard coming back at quarterback for Kansas State, I think the expectations would be reasonable to be in the 8 to 10 win range. All right. I feel like the impact of Avery Johnson, he adds a bit more steam to that hype as well. And, there's been a lot of national reporters out there like an Andy Staples of On3 who said a couple weeks back that the ceiling for K-State was not just making the playoffs, but winning a game in the playoffs. If you were going to make the playoff as a Big 12 champion, if you get a bye as a top 4 seed, so you're talking about winning a playoff game, all of a sudden you get into the semifinals. So in a way, that's certainly a lot of high praise. But you also look at the roster, Drake, and say, hey, wait a second. A lot of it sets up, and it's dangerous for me to kind of go towards this area because anything can happen with the offseason with the NIL and transfer portal. But if you can retain everybody from this season, this roster is really poised to make a massive run for 2025. But you can't really rely on that with all the mitigated factors outside of what's just happening on the field and the eligibility as for everybody. But you also can't just waste opportunities with Avery Johnson at quarterback. All right. I think there's such a unique position for Kansas State where where you have an unbelievable stud at the best position of the field in your backyard. You kept him in the state. You have them wearing purple and white, all right? If the recruitment was occurring this season with the dynamics that were at play with recruiting and conference realignment, I think it would probably been more difficult for Avery Johnson to commit to the program. So while you have him, you need to maximize that, especially in a world where we've already painted a picture of where the Big 12 is at. It's a fight for respect. It's really a long-term future being a major college football or college athletics program. That's, to me, what's on the line for Kansas State. So you better go win that league and make a playoff appearance while you have Avery Johnson at the helm, and really no better time to do so than the present or this upcoming season.
So for a general viewer and even for an analyst, when I look at Kansas State and say, okay, Ben Sinnott's gone. Okay, Cooper Beebe is gone. Okay, Will Howard is gone. You've lost your starting quarterback, the best offensive lineman in the entire conference, and maybe the most dangerous, or at least the most fun for me to watch, pass catcher in the league last season. I love watching Sinnott play tight end. You lose those three guys, how can you say that this Kansas State team is better than last year's offensively when three major pieces are gone?
Well, it's no question that the offensive line is going to have to be partly rebuilt. Of course, you got several guys that played last year that will take the step up in leadership roles, but you're losing two NFL offensive linemen, including one of the best in the country, and Cooper Beebe.
Correct.
So that won't be easy. Several changes will have to be made there. There will also be some changes, you got to point this out as well, in the coaching staff. I love the addition of Matt Wells to the coaching staff, but you're putting him as a co-offensive coordinator with Connor Riley. Quite frankly, to me, there's too many cooks in the kitchen. There's not a whole lot of cohesion there. Colin Klein, of course, departed for Texas A&M, so a definite question to answer there. But, there's a reason Chris Kleiman is getting paid the big bucks while I'm not in the field. So there goes that. I also still wonder about the depth, particularly on the interior of the defensive line, with several of the departures with Jay Clifton and Daniel Green. So you can go nitpick of certain things here or there with the roster. But to answer your question, Drake, I think they just have a lot of buy-in talent. And the sky is, the cosmos is the limit for this K-State offense, especially when you have an explosive backfield with Avery Johnson, DJ Gittens, and the little dynamo from Derby, Kansas, and Dylan Edwards. And with the new Big 12 as well, I think the schedule is manageable enough. I don't think it's over the top easy by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's definitely very manageable. So it's reasonable enough to say that the expectations should get to Arlington. It's hard for me to say what the reasonable expectation should be. Okay, you have to go win this league, because I think that's going to be in 2025. I think there are legitimately 7 teams that can make an argument for this year, for the Big 12 championship, knowing that their ceiling is incredibly high as well. But I think this is a year where K-State should look at it as, all right, this should be the year where the Wildcats make a run for a Big 12 championship. I believe that, and a lot of the Big 12 media outlets also tend to believe that as well with the preseason media rankings as well.
Was it the Texas game last year where the offense fell apart late?
It wasn't late. It fell apart early. It fell apart early.
I think it was the Texas game that I vividly remember. It was the 2-point conversion. It was the 2-point conversion where I thought, what is Colin Klein smoking? What is happening right now?
Okay.
Are we upset that Colin Klein's gone?
In terms of making several decisions like that, I part of me is a little bit satisfied. But I think another thing to point out is that it's not only Colin Kleinvets, for one, making several of these late game decisions. It is also Chris Kleiman, and we've seen this several times where the play calling gets to get a little too tight, too conservative here or there. A lot of the people that I talked to from K-State is like, I mean, it's your last chance to win in Austin. You got to go out with a bang. I was like, dude, I mean, Malik Murphy was stalling. The Texas offense was stalling. They had to settle on field goals. Like, I mean, if you got, I know Chris Tennant missed a field goal around the final few minutes of that game, but like he made one like as the final seconds ticked down. So, I mean, I don't know. Personally, I would have gone for the field goal as well, considering that you are also on the same kind of tier as Texas in terms of making routes towards a Big 12 championship game. If Chris Tennant was able to make a field goal after that, and if K-State was able to score after that, a touchdown or so, who knows what Texas would have done, because their offense could have possibly stalled. But so it goes. Sometimes in football, you make decisions in which it's in the best interest of a roster, but some people like me will tend to disagree.
It was that play where I was like, all right, if Colin Klein leaves, I'm okay. I'll live. And I still think I'm going to live. John, for those that are listening to the show today, whether they're Kansas State fans or not, they want to find more of your work, where can they go?
Well, obviously, it is the Cat Attack Pod. Of course, for all the updates and notifications, you guys can listen to Cat Attack. Follow Cat Attack on Twitter, Cat Attack POD Pod. You guys can listen to the show on Wildcat 91.9 live every Tuesday and Thursday nights from 6 to 7. We also got several shows out on Spotify. Drake, we might have to get you on as a kind of a special guest as well.
100%, man. Would love to return the favor anytime. John, thanks so much for doing this.
Absolutely, no worries.
And for those that are listening, thank you for joining the biggest, the number one podcast in the number one Big 12 podcast in America. This has been and always will be Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.